Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to be talking about Commander, tough rules, and cool interactions, episode 158. Today's episode is going to take a look at one of the recent room cards that we got from Duskmourn, but not because of it being a room necessarily. I've covered that in depth in episode 147, but I'll be talking about this room because of the actual effect that one of its halves has on casting spells, which is the focus of today's episode. So, let's jump straight into it. Dazzling Theater and Prop Room are the two halves of the room, but we're going to be focusing on the left side of Dazzling Theater, which quite simply says, creature spells you cast have Convoke. That may not seem all too crazy just yet, but before moving on to the next card, let's make sure everyone knows what Convoke does, and there is reminder text of that ability on the card itself, but let's also take a look at what the comprehensive rules say about Convoke, as sometimes the reminder texts miss out on some details. We can find Convoke defined in the comprehensive rules in section 702.51a that says Convoke is a static ability that functions while the spell with Convoke is on the stack. Convoke means for each colored mana in this spell's total cost, you may tap an untapped creature of that color you control rather than pay the mana. For each generic mana in this spell's total cost, you may tap an untapped creature you control rather than pay that mana. Importantly, Convoke is not an additional or an alternative cost, which means that you could cast something with Mutate, like Auspicious Sterix, for its Mutate costs, and still Convoke it. Or creatures with Squad, like the Ultramarines Honor Guard. Those types of things can be convoked. Okay, so now on to the other card in this scenario, and for this specific example, we will use Ashnod's Altar, which is an artifact that has the activated ability of sacrifice a creature to add 2 generic mana to your mana pool. So does this mean that with no lands or any other mana sources, if you had just this theater, this altar, and these 2 creatures, could you cast your 6 mana creature that has a cost of green, green, and 4 generic? You can tap these 2 green creatures to pay for the green pips in the cost of your 6 mana creature via Convoke, as them being green means that they can pay for a green pip. And then you can sacrifice them for the 2 generic mana each for a total of 4 generic mana. Combined, this is 6 mana, and we've got the 2 greens covered in that mana. Of course, I wouldn't be making this video if it were just that easy. The answer is that no, you can't play it out like this. If instead of the Dazzling Theater, you had a card like Enduring Vitality from the same Duskmourn set, it has the static ability that says, creatures you control have tap, add 1 green mana of any color. So to understand why there is a difference here, and why one works and the other doesn't, we must take a look at the steps to casting a spell, which the comprehensive rules covers in great detail over multiple different sections within CR 601.2. But we don't need to go through all of them. We will focus on CR 601.2G and H, which are both towards the ends of these steps to casting a spell. The steps before these two cover things like announcing your spell, choosing modes, choosing targets, determining the full cost, and more. But CR 601.2G states that if the total mana cost includes a mana payment, the player then has a chance to activate mana abilities. Mana abilities must be activated before costs are paid. And then CR 601.2H says, the player pays the total cost. First, they pay all costs that don't involve random elements or moving objects from the library to a public zone in any order. Then, they pay all remaining costs in any order. Partial payments are not allowed. Unpayable costs can't be paid. So why do these things mean that we can't do what was in the original scenario, but the second scenario does work? Oftentimes, we think of Convoke as a mana ability, kind of how you tap a Llanowar Elves for mana just as you would tap a land with the same mana ability. But Convoke isn't that. It's not a mana ability. It is a form of payment to the spell. So it isn't done during that earlier 601.2G, but it is done in that later 601.2H. The ability that we see on Ashnod's altar is indeed a mana ability, which means that it is done during the earlier 601.2G, so if you sacrifice those 2 green creatures via the altar to get that 4 generic mana, when we then move on to 601.2H, those 2 green creatures are no longer around in order for them to be tapped to help pay for those 2 green pips in your spell. And as much as you just want to tap them for Convoke and then sacrifice them during the same step of casting the spell, the game's rules just don't make it so that that can be done. The Enduring Vitality grants a mana ability to your creatures, so you can both activate them for their mana ability to tap for a green mana, and then activate the mana ability on the altar in that same step to casting your spell. This is also why you cannot tap a summoning sick creature with a tapping mana ability, but you can use a summoning sick creature to help pay for something with Convoke and tapping them through that Convoke. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you have even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta.